This is a quick presentation about just one series of stamps issued in Hungary. I find it remarkable in the catalogs and in my collection. These stamps just jump out at me. So the Austrian Empire was going through great turmoil, and there were tremendous centrifugal forces as ethnicity after ethnicity decided it wanted greater autonomy. The biggest problem for Hungary was the Hungarians, which made up a large proportion of the population. And finally, as the Austrian Empire became weaker, uh, which was evidenced by a conflict it had with Prussia, uh, Franz Joseph came to realize that he better give the Hungarians some kind of autonomy if he wanted them to stay with him. This seal was created after Hungary got its limited independence from Austria. And I've never seen a national seal with more stuff on it. It's simply incredible what's going on there. And every little thing would require a reason for it being there, and you'd have to explore what it is, whether the griffin to the left, which is, of course, a mythical animal with the body of a lion and the head of a bird of prey and wings. The next to that is the imperial crown of Austria. But next to that, now that Hungary has limited autonomy, you have the crown of St. Stephen with its famous bent cross. And there are various theories as to why that cross is that way. You also will see like that red checkerboard thing there next to the angel. It looks very much like it's representing Croatia, because Croatia had.
What about the coat of arms in the middle with the small crown?
I believe that is the crown of the dual monarchy, so it indicates that you're emperor of both Austria and king of Hungary.
Right, right. That's the way they designate. This particular assemblage of symbols is just before World War One. Hungary got its limited autonomy in 1871. And I guess they just kept adding more and more as to the insignia as various areas demanded some kind of recognition. Of course, the result of World War One was the dissolution of the Habsburg Empire in Austria. This is a map showing what Hungary looked like. You can see it's a very large, anything that is in color here is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The blue is Hungary. The pink part is what Austria retained complete control over. There's a large greenish section, and that is Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is almost impossible to describe. It was still technically a part of the Ottoman Empire in 1871, but the Hungarians and the Austrians ran all affairs. They had what they called a condominium authority in those two provinces. And then adjacent to that is another pink section that is more or less separated from the rest of Austria. That's the region around Croatia. So that is what Hungary looked like. As time went by, and particularly at the end of World War One, we will see that Hungary is greatly diminished. In 1871, Hungary took it upon itself to issue its own stamps. I find these very attractive. They're very, to sort of misuse the word Victorian, loaded with ornamentation and so on, but straightforward. That's Emperor Franz Joseph. These stamps were first printed by lithography and then engraved. The engraved ones are much more common than the lithographed ones. Although both issues were put out in 1871, it was the engraved stamps that remained in circulation longer.
What's a simple way to determine the difference between an engraved stamp and a lithograph? People tell me you can sometimes run your finger over the engraved stamp and
Yes.
tell it's engraved, but I don't know that that always works.
I suppose it doesn't always work, but the idea of engraving stamp is getting ink down into the recesses and then pressing the paper so hard against the plate that after you have cleaned the raised part of all ink. So there is running a finger over stamps will very often, and in fact, with this issue here, I have some of both, and it's distinct. You really can feel the difference if you run a finger gently over it. You will feel the ups and downs of the engraved stamp. The lithograph stamp, you don't feel it.
And you can often see the impression, raised impression on the back of the stamp, but not always.
True, that's true. It depends a lot on the thickness of the paper.
Is there a visual difference in any way at all, or is it?
Engraved stamps are usually much sharper, if you'll let me use that word. Very tiny details can still be shown, whereas lithograph, you get more of a field of color going with it. There is another type of production of stamps, and that is typography. Now, in that case, and all these stamps here are typographed. In that case, the ink is put on the raised part of the design, and the paper is rather lightly pressed against it so that you get the color on the paper just from the raised part of the stamps. It's exactly the opposite of engraving or intaglio. So this is a sample of the kind of stamps that Hungary was issuing as an autonomous region of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I find them rather commonplace, not particularly interesting. And the subject matter on the stamps is the usual stuff, if you will. So going from the upper left to the right and then to the bottom row, you have Emperor Franz Joseph. You have King Karl and his queen, Zita, who succeeded Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph died during World War I. Karl took over, and I'll get to this later, he tried to negotiate a settlement to the conflict. He was not successful.
Yes, he was caught by his allies.
Yeah, Germany had no intention of stopping fighting at the time, and Germany was the preponderant central power. So Karl, interesting enough, was Karl I of Austria, but he was Karl IV of Hungary. I don't know who the first three Karls were. And when I use the word Karl, this is always a problem in international stamps. Many people will call him King Charles, Karl being German for Charles. Then probably the least interesting stamp in this little selection here is the one in the upper right, which just has an envelope on it and a value placed in the center of the envelope. A lot of these stamps exist in huge quantities of varieties because of watermarks and things like that. And after a while, it's of limited interest, I find. But I did have some free time many, many decades ago, and I went through and I carefully found all the watermarks from dealers. And as Steve, you will certainly know, very often you got the wrong watermark in there. They're not particularly expensive, but when it's a series of 30 stamps and there are 3 types of watermarks, you're going to get some mix up in there.
Well, plus the watermarks that they used were similar to each other in some ways.
Yes,
too.
Yes.
And
it was the crown of St. Stephen's most often.
Yeah, but sometimes it was a profile view, sometimes it was flat on, and sometimes, since you only get part of the watermark image on the back of any given stamp, they're difficult to distinguish from one another.
I'm not going to go that far with this because, as I said, this is really about one series of stamps, which I have not yet even shown. So the subjects here are, again, commonplace. The agricultural laborers in the bottom, the beautiful Parliament building in Budapest, and the Turtle stamps, which exist with many, many watermarks. The Turtle was a mythical bird that supposedly flew over the territory of Hungary and protected it. Interestingly enough, the Ottoman Turks had a very similar legend about a giant bird that protected them. So here's King Carl and Queen Zita at their wedding. I just put this photo in because it does show the aged Franz Josef to the right there. And I'm just trying to put faces and portraits to some of these stamps. Carl takes over as both Kaiser, emperor, and as king of Hungary. And Hungary issues a stamp on the right. It's, again, rather commonplace. He's got the crown of St. Stephen on his head for ceremonial purposes. And to the left, there he is as Emperor of Austria. I don't find either of these stamps particularly interesting. But what happens next absolutely always astonishes me. This is the issue. When the war ended and Hungary was in total chaos, a republic was declared. That lasted just a few months, and then a Soviet-style republic was declared. Not many people gave their allegiance to the Soviet-style republic. It really was a clique of people who were in Budapest, took over government buildings and said, now we are the government of Hungary. Okay, but most people paid no attention to it. This government lasted only a few months, I think about 4 to 5. But what amazes me about these stamps is the cartoon-like, caricature-like design on them. I have never seen any stamps earlier than these that had this kind of a look to it. They don't even look like official stamps in many ways. They look like labels or something. And I've always found these stamps just jump out off the page whenever I see them. Each of the stamps had these 3 words on them. I hate to venture and try to pronounce them. Magyar, meaning Hungary, or I think it can also be the adjectival form Hungarian.
In
Yeah.
Hungarian, that's pronounced Magyar. The A comes out like a U, and the GY in Hungary is a D, the letter D, as in David.
Well, I'm glad I excused myself before I got working on this slide. Because we all know that Hungarian is related to no other language except they say the Finns or something like that. Tanax. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's the most important word here because it translates to Soviet. And interestingly enough, even when the USSR was still extant, and it stood for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, I don't think 1 American in 10 could tell you what Soviet really meant. It means council. Suppose the idea behind it is experts get together and they form these councils in the oblasts in Russia. And the best ideas are tossed back and forth and settled on, and decisions are made that way. And this is what they were trying to do in Hungary.
Fred, can you help us with that last word, the one for republic?
That shag, the SAG, which is pronounced shag, S is pronounced as SH in Hungarian. That's some kind of a, I guess a republic might be a good word for it, but the shag is like an adverb, an adjective of a national entity.
The illustration here is one of the many, many banners that this republic used. They tried things out. If you look at it closely enough, you see that it's got the red star, which is the symbol of world socialism. It has a hammer, It doesn't have a sickle, but it has an agricultural implement, a plow, and the horizontal tool is something to do with wood.
I think it's part of the
Forest.
plow.
Well, okay, maybe it is. Yeah, yeah. They had many, many such banners with different designs on them. This is just a quick look at what Hungary was like in about 1880. The area that is in red is where ethnic Hungarians are predominant. The other areas are where ethnic Hungarians are scarce and few on the ground. This caused tremendous trouble both at the time and later. Um, Alan has gone through the Balkans with us many times, and if you wanted to really have ethnically pure little sections, you would have something like 400 tiny countries. It'd just be impossible. But as nationalism was growing, various people wanted recognition, they wanted more autonomy, and it did cause a lot of trouble. Today is about the size of the large pink area. Most of the rest of it has been taken away. Hungary, of course, was in the Central Powers in World War One, and therefore was treated
Harshly.
a good word, the right word, very harshly in the treaties after the one that authorized neighboring countries to take chunks away from what was the Hungarian section of the Austrian Empire. Czechoslovakia is a new country to the north of Hungary at the end of World War One. It takes considerable territory. Romania takes what it wants. The result is that of all the countries in Eastern Europe, contrary to the Wilsonian notion of local people deciding what country they would belong to, people who thought themselves of ethnic Hungarian background were really scattered among many countries. And even to this day, I think as many as 40% of people who consider themselves Hungarian don't live in Hungary. In any case, the series of stamps had five separate designs. Going through them just quickly, Karl Marx, no explanation needed. I'm going to pronounce this all wrong, Fred. Sandor Petőfi, I don't know. He's a highly regarded poet in Hungarian history. And some of his work, only some, glorified ethnic Hungarianism, if you will. But he was also a love poet and other things. Martinovics, I can say nothing more than what I've got on the screen here. Scientist, philosopher. He was kind of he considered himself a Renaissance man, a free thinker about all kinds of things. I'm not sure if his influence has lasted. Georgi Doza, now we're going back way into Hungarian history. He was a leader of the underclass. And this particular stamp I find absolutely, I repeat myself when I say it, but I just can't think of any country that issued stamps in this form other than Hungary. And Hungary only did it with this one series. I don't think I've ever seen a used copy.
I haven't. I'm surprised that the catalog value for used copies on this set isn't much higher.
Well, you notice it's in italics, right? The prices for used stamps are in italics, which means it's difficult to determine what the right price should be. And of course, I suppose there's also the problem of knowing whether the cancellations are genuine. That might be difficult to determine.
And Friedrich Engels, another publicist and journalist and a theorist of Marxism. So you can see that the stamps that the Soviet Hungarian Republic in its short life issued were international in nature, and that's because Engels was a German, Marx was a German Jew, so on and so forth. One thing that did jump out at me was the denominations. They go 20, 45, 60, 75, and 80. Why they're clustered so close together, I don't know. What did you get for your extra 5 filler? So I'm just pointing out that this series of stamps really does have a unique look. Perhaps I'm wrong about that. Maybe someone can bring forth some other stamps from this era or earlier that has this cartoon-like quality to it.
I think there's a resemblance here between these stamps and some of the others that are considered to be influenced by Art Deco design. Just this morning, I was reading an article in the latest American Philatelist, the APS journal, about Art Deco influenced stamps designs. And I think if you look at some of those, the very bold and simplified representations and strong simplified inscriptions are characteristic of Art Deco, and I think that these stamps may belong in that category.
I keep going back to they look like sketches and caricatures, but okay. In any case, the Soviet Republic falls in a matter of months. Admiral Horthy or Fred to my rescue again.
That's Miklos. Again,
Miklos.
the S is as an SH.
And the last
Right.
name?
Horthy. That's as it's spelled.
Miklos is Hungarian, is the Hungarian form of Nicholas. And in the literature, as I said about Karl and Charles and so on, various places go back and forth on what they call these people. Scott, I think, calls him Nicholas Horthy, and the Mikkel catalog, I think, refers to him as Miklos. In any case, the the government is led by Horthy. A king is put on the throne, but he's a figurehead. And I've always been bemused by the notion of Hungary being run by an admiral, since it is an entirely landlocked country. I wonder, what was he admiral of? The rubber duckies in his bathtub?
But the map you showed that there was an extension of Hungary between the two parts of Austria that actually reached the coast.
Not after all the land grabs had been done.
Yeah, but he was admiral during the war, I'm sure.
He won one naval battle with the Hungarian Navy, but as you say, eventually the country became landlocked, but yet he kept that title. He also was let off very easy by the Allies after the Second World War. He was really and it's disputable, but he was a war criminal who was allowed to go to Portugal and live out his days there.
In the Second World War, I'm not going to get to that in this discussion, but Hungary, of its own free will, joined with the Nazis, and as opposed to most other countries which were taken over and at the end of a rifle may have cooperated to some degree. But Hungary was with Italy and Germany right from the get-go. In 1949, 2 stamps from the set were commemorated or honored or reprinted, not so much because the now long-lasting government of Hungary, socialist communist government, was interested in the stamps, but it was the 30th anniversary of the first Soviet Republic in Hungary. And these are the 2 stamps that reference that fact. Whenever I look at these things, I do see, I think of the Sunday papers or something like that. And I always think if they could add one more to the set, I think Major Hoople of Our Boarding House. Does any of you remember that cartoon? It was a single panel, absolutely hilarious. The Major is a drunkard, a boaster, a liar, a very dubious past, so on and so forth. But I find the way he was drawn by a man named Gene Ahern very similar to the way these caricatures on the stamps were done. And so I just, to wrap it up here, sometimes I just imagine that he also joined the set, and there he is.
Very good, Raj.
That's hilarious, Roger. Very good.
Deserve a medal for that one.
Very good, very good.